Good afternoon, Patriots. This is Bill Muckler with the American Vision on the TLBTV network, and it's brought to you by the Liberty Beacon Project. And today I'm proud to announce a special guest I have, Tom Martin. Tom is a fellow author and a brother Marine, and we've gotten to know each other quite well over the past year, and he's got my books and I've got his books, and I'm telling you, really great read. So Tom, welcome to the show. Really glad to have you on, and tell us where you're broadcasting from.
Welcome, Bill, and thank you for inviting me this morning. I live in Surprise, Arizona, a small community about 20 miles northeast or northwest of Phoenix, and been living here now about 15 years.
Yeah, that's interesting because when we first got talking, I recognize a connection there because my brother lived in Surprise for a long time, but then he moved just a few years ago to Verrado, which I guess is very close to Surprise or next to it or something like that.
Verrado is one of the communities that have been recently built, and very nice homes up there.
Yeah, he's got a great place. He's retired from the St. Louis area where I'm from, and I guess I should tell everybody where I'm broadcasting from. I'm in Cocoa, Florida, in my home studio, and you can see my book banners on the back, and my Mizzou flag is there because we got the football season started. And just 2 hours ago, we had a tremendous lunch right out of Cape Canaveral, which is right across the river from us because we're on America's beautiful space coast. So, Tom, tell us a little bit about your background. You are originally from Washington State and entered the United States Marine Corps, and tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I enlisted actually in April of 1961. The Army and the Navy and the Marine Corps and the Air Force recruiters were invited to our high school to speak to the seniors that year. And our principal at that time was retired major from the Marine Corps. And so that was probably one of the primary reasons that I ended up going with the Marines. But I enlisted in April and graduated in early June. And I left in August to go to boot camp, and spent my first 3 months there in San Diego at MCRD. From there, of course, I went to infantry training over at Camp Pendleton, where I spent a month. And I got home in time for Christmas that year. And then shortly after my leave, I was in Memphis, Tennessee, a little town called Millington, just north of Memphis, the Naval Air Station there. And that's where our aviation electronics schools were being held at the time. And so I spent the next 10 months in Memphis in Millington and studied aviation electronics and radar. And then I was transferred down to Marine Air Group 26 in North Carolina, a town called Jacksonville, near Camp Lejeune. And I was stationed at the Marine Corps Air Facility at New River. I was part of HMM 262, a helicopter squadron. And my squadron was the training squadron to train aircraft pilots. They gave them 500 hours and became a hack. And so I spent the next 3 years with HMM 262. While there, I went on 2 different cruises. I went on one cruise, Steel Pike 1, which was over to Europe. We had an unfortunate mid-air collision and lost 13 Marines. But the overall exercise was the largest landing since World War II. We had over 80 ships that were in the fleet and several submarines. We left the European continent and came back to the U.S. and within 3 months we were aboard ship again down into the Caribbean, down to Panama for some jungle warfare training. This was in 1964, and as you'll recall, the Vietnam War was just really kicking off then. The Gulf of Tonkin had occurred, and there was a pretty big mess over there. And so we took a battalion of Marines down to Panama, and we supported them in the jungle warfare training for 3 months. And upon my return, I only had less than a year left to go. So my squadron was preparing for disembarkment to to Vietnam, and I prepared for my discharge, and I took my discharge in August of '65 and returned home.
So you've had quite an interesting career, and the cruises. I remember when I was on active duty, which was about the same time. The big thing in the Marine Corps was going on med cruises, and when you said you went to Europe, that was what I guess we called the slang med cruises, because you cruised in through the Rock of Gibraltar, Gibraltar Straits, and into the Mediterranean, and from what I understand, I got to see some pretty interesting sights and cities there too.
I'm sure you did. This actually wasn't the med cruise. We did have a contingent of Marines on a med cruise at that time, but this cruise was primarily a mock invasion with Spanish, Portuguese, and English navies and troops, and we did a landing there on the coast of Spain, and then from there we went up to France and spent some Liberty time there, and then over to England. And then when we returned home, we started across the North Atlantic, and believe it or not, our helicopter carrier cracked a bulkhead, and we returned back to Plymouth, England to have some repairs made. And so we had to stay there for another week, darn it.
Okay, so you weren't really on one of these cushy med cruises. You actually were working.
Yeah, we were working. We had flight ops every day, except while we were in the North Atlantic. The seas were too rough, so we hangared all the aircraft, and about the only duty we had was performing fire watch. And I'm sure you know what that is.
Yeah, every Marine knows what that's all about.
Yes.
So from there, when you were released from active duty in the Marine Corps, obviously honorable discharge, and then went to work in electronics, I guess, or the telecommunications area?
Well, I did. Initially on my return, like a lot of young men, I bounced around from one job or another, and then I found an opportunity to go to work at the Nike Hercules Army Missile Base in Redmond, Washington. And so I went down and I applied for work there, and I was accepted and went through some training, and I became a radar operator. Had to join the National Guard, the Army National Guard at the time, and so I finished my reserve time with the Army National Guard and was a radar operator for the Nike Hercules missile site. We had 3 sites in Washington. We had the Redmond site, which was run by the National Guard. We had one at Kingston, which was run by, I believe that was run by the regular Army, and then one on Vashon Island, which was run by the National Guard. And we worked in conjunction with McCord Air Force Base, the headquarters for all of the area surveillance. And we had practices where we worked with the B-52s who were attempting to come in and simulate dropping bombs in the Seattle area. But with the advent of hydrogen bombs and the range that they had by our missiles were soon outdated, and so I saw the writing on the wall and left that position. I did a couple more jobs with Boeing aircraft and a couple other jobs, and then I went back to school, and eventually I went to work for Pacific Northwest Bell Telecommunications Company in Washington, and I worked there until 1990.
Yeah. The reason I wanted you to tell us about your background is I want people to get to know who you are and get to know you. But one of the points I've been trying to make in some of my shows, previous shows, is I bill myself as a guy who has done all the jobs Americans won't do. I've done every kind of job you can imagine, and a lot of them weren't really too nice. But the thing is, starting out in the Marine Corps, it gives you a foundation, and there's so many people think, oh, should I go into service, or or can my kids go into service? Is that a good thing? And I think it's the greatest thing you can do because it gives you a good foundation. You can come out and you actually know how to work. You have some work experience, and you've been with people, and you know how to do things. And then that leapfrogs you in or jumps you into all sorts of opportunities where you can get into just about any field you want to get into. But you got to start someplace. And to me, starting in the military, especially in the Marine Corps, that was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. And it sounds like it's done very well for you too. So then what I started doing after I finished my consulting career is I had a book I wanted to write. Obviously, you felt like that was something you wanted to do too. So tell us, how did you get started writing, and what was your motivation, or what was your thought process in doing that?
Well, it's interesting you should ask that, Bill, because up until I actually began writing, which was in the year 2012, I hadn't really aspired to create any writing or write anything other than I did a little poetry from time to time, mostly for some of the girlfriends I knew. But I did start hiking in the White Tank Mountains, which are very near my home. And I would go along and take my camera with me and take photos, especially in the early spring when the cacti were in bloom. So one day I was out hiking, and it was late spring, and I may have mentioned this on our last conversation, but I was kind of fantasizing about a young boy maybe trying to find a flower to put on his mother's grave. And the more I thought about the story, I thought, that might make a good short story. And so lo and behold, I come across a saguaro cactus that had one flower remaining. And I thought, well, that'll be the title of my book. So when I returned home, I sat down and I started to write. And that was how I came up with my first novel, The Last Flower. It took maybe a month to write it. If you combined all the time that I spent on it, probably 2 or 3 months. But if you added up all the time, no more than a month. And it turned in from a short story into a full-size novel, not a large novel, only 50,000 words. But I wrote it, and I set it aside and forgot about it and started writing another story. I had some ideas. But The Last Flower, probably a year went by, and I pulled it out and I started reading it, and I thought, this is a damn good story. I can't believe I wrote this. But I shared it with a few friends just as a whim, and I sent the Word document manuscript to them, and 201, they all came back and said, you should try to publish that book. It's a great story. So maybe a year went by, another year, and I finally reached out to a publisher, and 2 or 3 publishers, and one came back and said, we'd like to publish the story. So I sent it off to them, and that's how I began.
Wow, that's really interesting. I remember you telling me about that, and it's so fascinating to me that you could see something and that caused you to create a story that people read. And the last flower, I know that's the one with the kind of the black cover or dark cover. Hold that up for us so people can, yeah.
Yes, this is it here.
Yeah. So just getting that initial thought, that creativity, you were actually able to create something that people can read and enjoy and bring joy to their lives. And that's what we're trying to do in America today, is get people to start realizing that, hey, we can do lots of things. We're really a great, exceptional people, and we can create things, we can do things, and we can bring joy to others. And so many people, they don't work, they don't want to work, and they never experience the joy of actually accomplishing something. And I'm sure that when you finally, got your first copy of that book that you could hold in your hand like you are now, you had to have this great feeling of accomplishment.
I did, and it was a very proud moment in my life. And of course, my wife got the first copy, and I signed that over to her, and she still has that. She displays it in the living room, and whenever we have company or they come over and they pick up all of my books one at a time and they look them over. Mm-hmm. But it was quite a feeling of accomplishment. And initially, I wasn't too. I wasn't terribly excited about it until I received that first copy, and then I thought, well, this is really going to go somewhere. So yeah, I was pretty proud of that first book. So the story is it's about a young man named Jose Lozano. He's a young Mexican boy living in Durango, Mexico. Pardon me. He's only 12 years old. He has 2 younger siblings, and and his mother and father, and the five of them live in a small shack in Durango, near a small poor town. The boy's family is torn apart when his mother comes down with cancer, and she realizes that she can't take care of her two youngest children, so she gives them away to a distant aunt. And Jose, he remains with his mother to care for her during her final days. And the title of the book, The Last Flower, originally was intended to be the last flower found to put on a grave, but it turns out that she calls her children her little bouquet. And when she's on her deathbed, she tells Jose, "You're my last flower, Jose." And that became the title of the book. So it's a metaphor for his name, and he goes on to great things and accomplishes a lot. The book is actually written in three parts. The first part is called Death, which is, of course, the death of his mother and the breakup of the family. The second part is Leaving, when he finishes high school and aspires to come to the United States. And during that time frame, he meets a young girl and finds a job and gets his first car and gets a good job and ends up enlisting into the Marine Corps. And the final part 3 is called The Hammer of Thor, and that's the time he spends in the Marine Corps in Vietnam, where he's seriously wounded and is awarded the Silver Star. He returns home, and there's quite a heartwarming welcome for him, and he ends up seeing his family, reunited with his family in Mexico. So it's quite a warming story, and I think most people that read it will enjoy it tremendously.
What a beautiful story. And to think that you created, I wish I could do that. I'm just not very creative in writing, but that, what a beautiful story. And you brought this young lad, showing all the compassion of his early life and bringing him through all his journeys, and which is also the name of one of your books, A Journey. What are some of the other books you've written?
Well, my second novel is Johnson House Mystery, and it was more of a lark than anything. But when my publisher read the Last Flower, he asked me if I had anything else I'd written, and of course, I was toward the tail end of writing this as a short story, and they wanted to publish it, so I sent the manuscript in, and it's about young Billy Jensen and his best friend Jimmy Fox, and they're coming of age in a small town in Indiana. Billy and Jimmy become embroiled in the mystery of missing children throughout several area states, most recently in their own hometown. The Johnson House is an old vacant home that lives, it's near the forest on the edge of town, and it's rumored by the neighborhood children to be haunted, and so that becomes sort of the focal point in the story, the Johnson House Mystery. A little boy turns up missing in town, and simultaneous with his missing, a family moves into the Johnson House, and the stepfather is quite a mean man, and so it leaves the reader questioning whether he's responsible for the things that are going on. Also, at the same time, a retired Navy veteran from World War II, he moves surreptitiously into an old cannery not far from the Johnson House. And so the reader's questioning who's actually doing all of this. And so the tail end of the story, when you reach the end of the book, we think we know who the killer was, but the very ending of the book leaves you with a question. So it left room for a sequel.
Oh, I love that. And don't tell us what the finish is. Let the readers find it out. But so you really you wrote a second book that's, so a lot of authors, they write these formulaic books where everything is it's really the same thing. They just use a little bit different setting, different names. This is a completely different story that you've told for the readers than your first one, and so I applaud you for that, because, like I said, I could never dream up stories like that. When I'm writing is, I'm off the top of my head, what the way I think things should work, is nothing very glamorous about that. So then what's your next book then?
My third book, and I waited about, maybe a year before I wrote my third book. It's The Storyteller. And this story it's actually about an octogenarian who's been separated from his wife for 40 years. He was an old-time radio storyteller back in the 40s. You'll remember when you sat by the radio on Saturday night and listened to Fibber McGee and Molly and some of the stories like Inner Sanctum and The Whistler. Well, that was what he did. He narrated storytelling, and he would tell stories for children and adults, and he did that during World War II and later. When television came out, he sort of fell from grace, and his wife, disappointed with his inability to go into television, they ended up getting divorced. So they've been separated for a number of years, and he lived in Florida, and his wife and child lived on the family ranch in Wyoming. And as time passed, they were, of course, divorced. And as time passed, his wife passed away, and then his daughter passed away. And the granddaughter gets a hold of him after about 40 years and invites him to come back to the ranch and spend his final years. So he's on a bus route headed to Wyoming, to Shoshone, where his family ranch was at, his childhood ranch. And en route there, he gets robbed and ends up put afoot. And so he's hitchhiking, and our story opens with him hitchhiking through a snowstorm in Colorado. And he takes refuge in a roadside bar and grill. And during the evening, the few patrons that are remaining there get snowed in. And late at night, they find out that he was a radio storyteller, and so he shares the story of Bayou Moon, which is the story of Louisiana moonshiners in the 20s. So he shares that story with them, and then as he progresses on his journey, he shares two other stories. So it's really three stories within a story, and he eventually meets up with his granddaughter and great-granddaughter, and it too has a very heartwarming ending. I think people will enjoy it.
Wow. So another completely different type of story, a great tale there. So let me tell you, Tom, I went up to my grandson's graduation last June, and while I was up there, I had arranged a few places where I could go talk to people, and one of them was my high school class had like a little mini reunion lunch, and I talked there, and some of them bought my book. And then I went to another place where my daughter was at a function, and people, I introduced my book to them. And then also I had a dinner with my group of my old fraternity brothers and their wives from the zoo, and they said, "How could you write a book? You never read a book. We remember you in college. You couldn't even pass English, and I almost flunked English, to tell you the truth, because I couldn't write creatively." Mm-hmm. But I was reading books, and I've read books all my life. And when I was in the Marine Corps, I remember all the time I spent at sea in the Pacific. You had to have something to read, because you could only do so much PT and so much training and so forth, and then the rest of it, you had to read. So for the last, and I've been around a long time, the last 50 years or so, I've been reading an average of a book a week. And I always went to the USA Today and the they had their Thursday book listings in there. I don't even look at that anymore. I look at the New York Times bestseller list, and those were the books I bought. And so I was trying to buy all the bestsellers. Mm-hmm. And what I found was, when I wrote my book and published it a few years back, I thought, well, wait a minute. There's a lot of people that are writing books that nobody ever heard of before, that aren't on the bestseller list. And I'm seeing these books now, and I'm getting introduced to them. So now what I've been reading is what I call independent writers. In other words, writers who aren't on the bestseller list. And what I've found is these are the best books I've ever read. And the stories like the ones you're telling are just fascinating to me. And I'm just enjoying it so much. And what I've done is I've been exposed to so many new and interesting stories and interesting authors. And so if people are going to always think, I got to buy the one book on the bookseller list, on the New York Times list, forget that. Don't buy them anymore. Start buying books by writers who you've never heard of before, and find out, boy, there's some great writers. And I can tell you one that kind of got me hooked on this was one of the Marines I went through most of my career with, Dick Reynolds, who was in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I think he just moved to Colorado. I got to get back in touch with him. Is that he something like you, he started writing short stories and then started writing books, and I started reading his books, and that's where I kind of got the idea, hey, look at all these wonderful authors that are writing all this great stuff, and nobody knows about it because you don't have the big publishing company, pushing your books. And if you look at, like my kind of book, I watch, like CNN or Fox News or MSNBC, and they're always promoting one of their books. And for example, I used to watch this program on Fox News called The Five, and each one of the five write a book, right? And then they all promote each other's book. They read each other's books. So I sent each one of them a signed copy of my book. Never even got a thank you note from them. Never got an acknowledgement, never got anything like, don't send me anything anymore, or your book is crap, we don't want to read it. They completely ignored it because they believe that unless you're some kind of a celebrity, you can't tell a story. And obviously what we've proven today is, here's Tom Martin, a Marine who has worked all of his life, done some very interesting jobs, and now has turned to providing more to us in the joy of telling us stories. And that's what people love. People love to hear stories, but now what they do is they watch them on TV instead of reading the story. And boy, watching something, a movie on TV is like an hour and a half to 2 hours. That's a sound bite. The book itself, with all, like you said, 40,000 and 50,000 words, I believe that in order to be classified as a novel, it has to be a minimum of 40,000 words. If it's less than that, it's called a novella. So you're writing novels. There's no way anybody can put 50,000 words in a 2-hour soundbite. And so you can get the real feeling of the story and understand the characters and how the characters are developed, which you can't see on the movies or on TV, and get them in a book. So really 3 fascinating stories. And now, how many books have you written altogether, Tom?
I've written 5. I just finished publishing Journeys, which is the book that you purchased.
Which is the one I have, yes. And the lovely Lainey is reading it right now, so I don't even have it to hold up for you, but I know you have a copy to hold up.
I have a lot of copies, actually, Bill.
Yeah,
but
I know.
Not too many.
Hey, here I am. I got a bunch of them too, and I keep telling people, read a book, buy my book, and I'll sign it for you. And you said something about you signed a book for your wife, and isn't it really a thrill to just be able to sign a book to somebody? I just love doing that, and I try to write something nice in there for each person.
You're absolutely right when you come talk about writing a book and the pride that you get from it, and the story that you tell is so much better when you read it between the covers of 2 books, or covers of a book, rather than watching it, like you say, a soundbite on television. You get so much more, I think, and you use your imagination when you're reading the book because the author's painting a picture for you, and if you take the time to read and interpret what he's writing or she's writing, you'll see what they're trying to say. And I've enjoyed writing, and I've done, like I say, I've written 5 books. My 4th book is I don't know if you knew this one. This is Gold Star Mother, and of course you know what Gold Star Mother means.
Yes, as a matter of fact, we talked about that when we Tom and I also do Skypes together, so it's not like we've never met each other before. And I was telling Tom about a book that a friend of mine, Jeannie Weaver, wrote, who is a Gold Star mother, and wrote a book called Gold Star, about her son Todd, who was killed in Afghanistan. So, and my heart goes out to any of the Gold Star mothers. My gosh, what a sacrifice you made. And also, Tom, my heart goes out to your mom, who is a Marine mom, and I love Marine moms. They're the greatest people in the world. So anyway, I'm talking.
Thank you very much, Bill. I appreciate that. Just as a side here, after I wrote this book and first published it, I decided I would send a copy to American Gold Star Mothers in Washington, D.C. And I sent it off, and I waited and waited, and I never heard anything for the longest time. And then I finally got a letter back. And if you don't mind, I'll read the letter.
No, I'd be delighted.
From, American Gold Star Mothers.
Okay, great.
It says, Mr. Tom Martin, and it says, Dear Tom, and this is very, very poignant. Thank you so much for a copy of your book, Gold Star Mother, which you recently sent to our national headquarters. Please imagine my surprise, no pun intended, of course, I'm from surprise, when I received the package and read the return address. My son, First Lieutenant Thomas Martin, was killed in Iraq in October of 2007. Of course, my name is Tom Martin. He was known by Tom to his friends and family. I look forward to reading your story about Bernice and how she dealt with the most horrific loss a mother can experience. Should you wish to contact me, I may be reached at, and she gives her name, Candy Martin, @gmail.com. And sincerely, Candy Martin, National President, Gold Star Mothers of America. So she received my book and opened it up and saw Gold Star Mother written by Thomas Martin, which was her son's name. Can you imagine the surprise she must have felt?
That had to be an emotional experience for her, and what a coincidence. Unbelievable. And this has got to be a fantastic story. Maybe just give us a little bit about it, so we, our audience and our viewers will become readers and will really want to read this book, because I know I only have Journeys now, but I'm expecting, to order all of your books so I can put them on my bookshelf and start reading them.
Well, you remember my talking about Johnson House Mystery.
Right.
Well, two of the characters in there, Billy Jensen is the main character, but his best friend is Jimmy Fox. And this book was written, or takes place in the 1950s. This book, we advanced the time by 12, 14 years into Vietnam era. And Jimmy Fox joins the Marine Corps. And so this story is about Jimmy Fox's mother. Our story opens when Bernice Fox, a recently widowed mother, receives word that her only child, Marine Corporal Jimmy Fox, has been declared missing in action in far-off war in Asia. When his body is returned, his personal effects accompany his remains. Our story follows Bernice as she struggles through the anguish of the funeral and the military burial afterward. Several days after the funeral, she generates the courage to go through his personal effects. Our story flashes back in time to Jimmy's youth when she finds several childhood treasures which Jimmy had taken with him to Vietnam. His Boy Scout knife, a photo of his first girlfriend, his first car, his summer job, the Johnson House Mystery, and his excitement at joining the Marine Corps. As she is about to repack her son's treasures, she discovers a packet of letters and an engagement ring found under his clothing. The letters were all written by a girl named Cynthia, who had remarkably beautiful handwriting. While reading Cynthia's letters to her son, it became apparent that Jimmy had a sweetheart she was unaware of. The final chapters follow Bernice in her attempt to find her son's love and inform her of Jimmy's death. So it's a story of the mother, not so much of Jimmy Fox, but it's the mother and the anguish that she goes through as she experiences the funeral and the burial, and then going through all his effects, and then finding out that he had a sweetheart, and she wanted to meet the girl and let her know that her boyfriend was killed in action. And so it does have a heartwarming ending. It's a very sad book, but as we go into the ending final chapters, it'll leave most people with tears in their eyes, but it is a very heartwarming ending, and I think people who read it will enjoy it.
Yeah, Tom, when you think about it, how many Gold Star mothers are there in the United States? If you think back in our Marine Corps history, just in Iwo Jima, we lost more than 5,000 Marines just on that one battle. And we lost, I don't know how many soldiers, I believe it was more than 5,000 when in Normandy, the beach in Normandy, and World War II, so many. And then Korea, I believe we lost, did we lose something like 50,000 in Korea and 57,000 in Vietnam?
Yeah.
That means there's 50,000 mothers who lost their sons, Gold Star mothers. And I can remember, I went to Mizzou, and when I graduated from Mizzou, I was going to get drafted, and I ended up getting accepted into the Marine Corps, into the Officer's Candidate course. And the morning that I left to go to Quantico, my mother gave me a hug, and she had tears in her eyes, and I didn't know what to think. I didn't understand that. So if you can imagine mothers having, tearfully sending their young boys off to the service, and then finding out, that, they didn't come back. That's gotta be heart-wrenching. So anyway, I applaud you for writing a story about them, because so many mothers, have given so much and made such a great sacrifice.
I couldn't agree more, Bill. I couldn't agree more. It was a pretty heart-wrenching story to write, because you and I both are from the same generation, and we both lost friends in Vietnam. And so losing one of my characters from Johnson House, and I wanted to emphasize what the mother goes through. And so people who have not experienced anyone that they know that loses a child can read the book and maybe have an inkling of what they do go through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's fascinating. So then that brings you to Journeys, I guess.
That brings us to this book.
The Journeys, okay.
This is the one you've presently got, and it's a compilation. It's not a novel. It's about 68,000 words, and it's a compilation of 7 short stories that I've written over the last 2 or 3 years. The first.
This is a perfect book for people to read who say, "Well, I don't have time to read," because especially now the summer's over. I'm a little late on this, but it's a perfect summer book, because you can read one of these stories in like 20 to 30 minutes, a half an hour. So it's not like you have to sit down and read something for 4 to 6 hours a day for an entire month. And you can read this beautiful story in, let's say half an hour. I don't know. Everybody's reading speed is different. Mine's really slow. But I love the idea of having a book with short stories in it, because you can read a story, you can set it down, and you come back a couple of days later, you can pick it up and read it again. And spending a half an hour reading this book, a story in this book, is so much more pleasurable and so much more enlightening and so much better than watching a half an hour or 1 hour TV show. Let me tell you that. So anyway, I'm interrupting you. Tell us more about Journeys.
Well, it's 7 short stories. The first story is in the book is called 3 Fortunes. And that's about 3 different people who each have their own idea of what good fortune is. A husband and wife who are traveling. This is in the early 60s, and they're traveling around the country, going from job to job. And they end up on a ranch in Ogallala, Nebraska. And the owner of the ranch, it's 1,500 square miles of ranch, and he's a widower, and so the story centers around those 3 people. Three Fortunes. I think it's a pretty good story.
It
I
is.
probably could have made it a little longer, but I wanted to make it a short story to fit into my book.
Yeah.
The second story is The Christmas Tree, and this is an actual true story. This is the story of my sister and I when we were very small. I was about 12 or 13 years old. And growing up in a poor family in the country in Snohomish, Washington, on a small farm, and we always look forward to Christmas, as most children do. And we wanted to begin celebrating Christmas earlier than we normally would. So we decided to set off and go find our own Christmas tree. So it's the story of her and I going out to look for a Christmas tree, and what happened when we brought it back home. The third story, What Dreams May Come, is about a young woman who discovers that a demon has crossed from the barrier between dreams and reality. You've heard the term succubus and incubus, and they manifest through a person's dream. And in reality, of course, they don't exist. But in my story, if you remain dreaming when one of those comes into your dream, you can manifest them into a person lying in your bed. And that's what happens. And so the dream brings this demon to life in her bed. And so that's sort of most girls aren't going to enjoy reading that story. But my fourth story is called Portals, and this is about a futuristic astronaut who's about to travel through time, and he discovers a terrifying world awaiting for him. Instead of transporting through time, he transports to a different dimension. And so that has a kind of a different ending. Henry, this is also a true story. This was an elderly gentleman who lived up behind my farm, my home childhood farm. He was an elderly German immigrant, and he sort of became a substitute grandfather for all the neighborhood children. So it's just kind of a heartwarming story that I wanted to tell people about. He lived to be 103 years old. The fourth story is Teddy, or sixth story, is Teddy. And that's, you remember a few years ago, we had a rave going on for young children, probably 20 some years ago now. It's called Teddy Ruxpin.
Yeah.
Well, I wrote a story about a Teddy Ruxpin and the family who had the little teddy bear. And this takes place during that big earthquake back in the 90s in California. A man's indifference towards God changes when miraculous circumstances occur, which involve not only Teddy Ruxpin, but the neighbor dog. And so anytime you write about a child or a dog, well, you're going to have a good story, I think. The last story is Grandpa, and that's about a man named Clint Stevens back in the 50s. And he discovers a proud heritage upon meeting his 95-year-old grandfather who's living in Santa Fe, New Mexico. That's a kind of a brief summation of what the story is about, but he actually believes that his father was killed in World War I and grew up in New York, only to find out that his father didn't die in World War I, but was divorced by his mother. And he receives a letter from an attorney that tells him that he's the only heir to his father's estate. So he thinks it's all a big mistake, but when he speaks with the attorney, he finds out that he's the rightful heir, and that his father just recently passed away. So he travels to New Mexico, Santa Fe, and meets the attorney. And during the course of their evening meal, he finds out that his grandfather is still alive and in a nursing home. So they go over to visit the grandfather, and he ends up spending 2 weeks with his grandfather, listening to his grandfather's history. And that's where the story comes, because we flash back with the grandfather back to the 1870s and 1880s, and we visit Tombstone with Wyatt Earp, and we visit Billy the Kid, and we visit a stagecoach robbery in El Paso, and we just go through lots of different adventures, trail drives and whatnot. We meet Teddy Roosevelt, then we go to the Rough Riders with the Rough Riders down to Cuba. And it's just got a lot of history in it, but we wrap the story around it, and a beautiful young Hispanic girl he meets on his father's ranch, and they become an item. And I think people who enjoy a love story will enjoy Grandpa very much.
You know, this book was really fascinating for me because I'm kind of a science fiction guy, and I've read a lot of science fiction, but I haven't read any lately. So I get a couple of science fiction type stories in here, or time travel stories, which are really fascinating. There's been a lot of movies made about time travel and so forth. So you're really giving us a full breadth of stories and things to think about. So, Tom, you started out, you wrote The Last Flower, and then you wrote the story about the boys in Indiana, and then The Storyteller, and The Gold Star Mother, and Journeys. Where can people buy these books so they can so you can actually sign them for them and inscribe it personally to the person? Because I know that's what I like to do, and so there has to be a way that they can do that from you other than Amazon, because if you buy from Amazon, it just ships out of the warehouse. It's untouched by human hands, so to say.
That's true. If anyone wishes to purchase a book from me, a personalized copy, they can email me. I'm on Facebook, by the way. Thomas H. Martin is my Facebook account. And you can find me. It shows my young 19-year-old Marine picture in dress blues. Mm-hmm. You can find me there, or you can email me on, and I have an MSN address. It's T as in Tom, M as in Martin, 4960 at msn.com. Feel free to email me, and we can discuss billing options. I have several billing options. I take personal checks. I take money orders. I take PayPal. I take anything but cash. I don't recommend sending cash, but you will receive. I also take credit cards and debit cards. I have the Square device. I think you're familiar with that.
Yeah, that's the way we did ours. But I use PayPal, but I use the Square, and all those avenues are available. So nobody has an excuse not to be able to buy a book from you.
That's true, unless they insist on sending cash. I've not accepted any cash, but if they want to gamble, I'll gamble with them.
Well, I sell it, believe it or not, when I go and talk to different groups, a lot of people, they'll give me cash, and so that's kind of nice, but it's hard to keep track of who everybody is. So, Tom, your story, your life is just fascinating, and you've written these great books for people to enjoy, and I'm just so glad to have you on the show, and I'm looking forward to reading more of your books besides just Journeys. I want to read them all. Now, if a lot of people I know say, well, I don't like to read print books, I like to read books on my Kindle. Are your books available as ebooks?
Yes, they are. One of the options that the author had through both of my publishers, actually. I'm on a second publisher. My current publisher is Gatekeeper Press. My previous publisher, Tate Publishing from Oklahoma City, they went bankrupt. But I do have the Kindle edition and Nook, I believe, are both available if people wish to download the ebooks.
Yeah, so they can go to Amazon. What's the best way to do that? Go to Amazon for Kindle and go to Barnes & Noble, B&N, where my books are, so I'm kind of familiar with that. And they can buy the ebook there. And so if you're on that, they can also probably buy the iBook for iPhones.
I'm assuming they can. I haven't.
I'm pretty sure. So no one, everyone. It will be able to find your book, and if you don't like to read print books, or you feel like all you like to do is read them on your tablet or whatever, then you can get the ebook. I know most of the books I read is ebooks, but sometimes what I do, and authors, I guess, really love me because I'll buy the book and print book so I can get it signed and put it on my shelf. And then I also buy in Kindle and I read it on my tablet because I like, late at night, I like to just get my tablet out and I can sit in the dark, or in dim light where I'm not disturbing anybody and read the book. So what I'm getting to is, folks, you don't have any excuses not to read a good book. And today we just learned about 5 great new books that you can read. So, Tom, thank you so much for being on the show with us. And for everybody that sees this, they'll also see the article that goes along with it, so they'll know a little bit about you and also where to buy your books and everything. And so now I'm going to say goodbye to everybody. We're going to have a short commercial break, and then I'll be back a little bit later. Thank you very much for watching us. This has been The American Vision with your host, Bill Muckler, with our guest author and Marine, Tom Martin. And Semper Fi, everybody. Semper Fidelis.
Semper Fi, Bill. Thank you very much.
Okay, boys and girls, we're back from my short commercial break, which hopefully you won't even have to see, but I'm still going to do my commercial because we talked about Tom's books, and I want you to remember that I wrote 2020 Clear Vision for America, and I'm also in the process of writing another book for you called 2020 A Clear Vision for Our Future, which is actually, it's not really a sequel to this book, but it helps further explain what this book is all about because it talks about restoring our Constitution. So the entire Constitution is going to be in this book, and our characters are going to be talking about and discussing the Constitution. And so you'll be able to get that book and also get this book. And remember, folks, get a spine, and because you're the only people I know that are going to have a spine. Our elected officials do not have a spine. Our media, they don't have a spine, no backbone. The only spine you get is this spine that you're seeing right now, plus your own, which is your own backbone. And I know you all have one, and I also know you all know how to read. You know how to read. Read the book. And if you don't want to get it in print, which I signed for you, and I have this wonderful page on here that you can see. If I can get this thing open, it always sticks together. See this page? It's even got my picture on there, and it's got a dedication on here. And in the dedication, I sign it right underneath that, so it's dedicated to you. And let me read who I dedicated this book to. I respectfully dedicate 2020 to the founding fathers of this great republic of the United States of America, and to all who have defended it with honor, especially those who gave all. And we know who all gave all, and we also know about the Gold Star mothers who sacrificed all also. And that's why I want you to read Tom's books. I want you to read all of Tom's books. Buy them. He'll sign them for you. And you can start out getting the Gold Star Mother if you like, or you can start out with The Last Flower, or you can start out with Journeys, but be sure you go ahead and get his books because they're great reads, and I'm looking forward to reading the rest of them. I've only read Journeys so far, but I'm hooked. I'm ready to read them all. Go ahead and buy the books, buy my book, start buying books, quit watching TV. All you see on TV is all, I can't say it because I'm not allowed to curse anymore. I don't do that anymore. But you know what I'm talking about. Don't watch TV. They don't tell you anything. All they tell you is what they want you to hear. It's all propaganda. Okay, folks. See you later. See you next week. And have a good time. Take care of yourselves. Semper Fi to all my Marine brothers and boys and girls. Have a good time. Have a great week.